a shared language within an organization around leadership, and that the importance of having a model that everyone can be engaged in, and it's not just limited to folks in authority or folks in executive seats, that it's a model that's very portable and it can be used across multiple facets of the organization. And that actually bridges out into the community and at the state level and even at the national level with some of the projects we've been involved with. So that shared language is such a valuable tool when you're going through changes or you have aspirations or goals or whatever you're moving towards. So that is my hope.
Well, thank you, Steve. Well, Melissa, I guess that we turn it over to you now.
I'm in it now. My name is Melissa Lunsford, and I am the Grant Projects Manager here at Fort County. I am the newbie on the panel, I guess, in the scheme of tenure and seniority. I have only been working in mental health for about 9 years, coming up on 7 here with Fort County in this role. And I think that the most important thing to me that can be elevated in these kind of conversations is how important it is to bring all the voices to the table. We kind of get maybe stuck in a rut maybe of going to the same people over and over again. And the more that we can go out and get those other voices that maybe we haven't listened to or haven't heard from lately, can really bring huge benefit to every challenge that we face.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for being here with me today and for kind of being with me like the last few months. I feel like you've heard a lot from me. This is ordinarily the spot in the program where I interview the writer. And I have to admit, I had a moment like a week or two ago where I was like, oh no, I haven't talked to the writer about this story. I'm like, oh wait, I am the writer. So it might be a little awkward for me to interview myself, but I did want to give a little bit of background about like how this story came about. And it sort of comes back to this book, When Everyone Leads, which is the national bestseller that the Kansas Leadership Center published earlier this year. And as that book was getting ready to be launched, I was looking for a way for the journal to do some journalism, to do some reporting on that content, and wanted to look for a place where we might see what it's really like for an organization to try to become a place where everyone tries to lead. And so I talked to some folks around here, did some research. And as I was doing that research, I came across like the level of engagement that Fort County had, not just with the programs, but with KLC ideas. There's a rare level of saturation in the organization, and that you have about 400 employees, and you've had so many trained and so many have multiple experiences. And I just thought it was, wow, this will be a really interesting place to look at and see, like, what does this really look like? Because it's not just 1 or 2 people. It's a lot of people bringing these ideas to bear and going through these trainings. And I thought we would learn something about what it means for an organization to truly like try to live out these ideas. And I think what I found is that in some ways, like, you live out the ideas better than what we do at KLC sometimes. And so it was interesting to see that. But I am curious, like, what made you say yes to like giving me the opportunity to tell this story? Because in doing so, like, there could be a lot of good sides of that, but it was also a big risk. Like, you didn't control how this story was told outside of like what you told me. And like, we didn't run the story by you and say, hey, is this okay? Like, we wrote what we thought we heard from you. So I'm curious, like, what made you say yes? And what's it been like so far having your story told?
Well, for me, I saw it as a pretty nice learning opportunity. Part of managing self is knowing the story other people are telling about you. And we probably need to know the story that our staff and our community are telling about us. And this is just one of those facets that we could kind of tap into and learn more about ourselves and what gaps we may have and where we can target next. So it's a little bit of a diagnostic exercise for us. But also an opportunity to celebrate some, because we know that we've got a lot of people that are energized and enthusiastic about what we're doing. So again, it's a learning opportunity, but it's a celebration too.
I remember, Chris, when the idea was presented to us about whether or not we'd be interested, and us kind of putting our heads together. What is the story? Like, why do they want to? Why would they want to interview? We were asking the same question, I guess. Why are you talking to us? But I remember that us kind of just reflecting back over the last few years and thinking, well, there really is a story in terms of transformation and working through some really difficult and challenges and exciting opportunities. But there are so many different ways that people can handle conflict or handle challenges in so many maladaptive ways that I think we see publicly in this day and age. Sometimes I think it's just a really good opportunity for us to be able to tell a story of there are ways to work through challenges in a way that that is good and good for all, and not necessarily polarizing. And I think that's an important part of what KLC offers.
Yeah. But it also sounds like maybe you hadn't like thought through like what the story was until you were asked, and you had to start thinking about whether to say yes, which I think is really interesting.
I think we had
True.
some hesitation to know because we do feel like we are so in the throes of the challenge that we haven't arrived. So we're like, do we tell the story midstream? You know what I mean? Like we're not arrived, kind of thing. But and not to undervalue either of those responses, because I would totally put those at the top of my list. But I think on the more selfish side of things, I'm just super excited about what's going on in mental health in Kansas right now. And so the opportunity to share what has gone on over the last few years and move that conversation further down the road, I think any opportunity for that is a win for behavioral health. So
yeah, and it seems like when we talk about mental health, particularly in the media, like usually the context is not things are going well, like that something good is happening, that people are being better served, or they're getting the stuff. It feels like particularly for that topic, to the extent that it rises to our attention, it's often because it's a problem. So shifting to the training, I'm curious about, like, from each of you three, like, how has building leadership capacity at Fork County Mental Health impacted the organization? Because I think that's always a question that's on our minds at KLC, is one about impact. Like, how do we know that this stuff is translating to on the ground change, and that it's not just an exercise in learning new language and learning new ideas, which is all really valuable, but like what makes it matter is something changing. So I'm curious about where you've been able to see impact.
Melissa, do you want to start?
thanks, Greg. No, I see the impact in a lot of different places. But I think that the topic I elevated is talking to people that it's impacting. And I think that we are doing a better job of getting right to the grassroots of issues and talking to the people it directly impacts. Not to get too much into the weeds, but we did a staff survey last year. It came up with some pretty significant feedback on a couple of things. And instead of just going, oh, okay, well, we might not be doing the greatest job at that, we're now digging deeper into that and actually talking to the individuals that have the ability to give feedback about maybe what could make things better as an employee, as a patient, et cetera. So I think that is giving us a new platform to tackle those things in a joint way, rather than just, oh, this is a leadership or an authority issue. It's top down. How do we address this then?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that seemed to come out in the story, that talking to a couple of sources, that the leadership ideas and the language of it gave them a way to talk with people in authority about the changes that they would like to see. And so they sort of felt obligated to like share what they were thinking, and also like the expectation that like people in authority would listen, because you sent all these people to leadership training. And if you were going to do that, like you had to also sort of figure out how to make use of it, and how to be receptive to ideas if you're going to encourage people to bring them.
Absolutely.
Well, and not to venture too far from what Melissa has described, because I think she's right on target. The thing that I've liked, that we've been able to see, and I hope we see more of, is it really has opened the conversation around what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we should implement that change. I mean, we've got a federal certification as a clinic that we need to, have fidelity to. So we can say to the staff, here's our certification goal or objective or outcome that needs to be achieved. But people feel more empowered to participate in the conversation and say, well, okay, let me tell you how it is when the boots hit the ground and what we really need to have consideration for to be successful at achieving that goal. And you've just got more people participating in that. And so I think we're learning better about what the work is and how it needs to get done. Staff understand from a bigger picture type perspective why we're asking for change that we may be asking for, and they're helping direct what that looks like. So they got some buy-in, and they feel like they can own that process, and they're going to have greater job satisfaction. We're going to be a more successful organization because of it. So that's the exciting thing for me to see happening. And again, Melissa said, we're not a finished product, but I can at least see those seeds germinating and a little bit of growth happening, and I think that's got some cool potential for our future.
I don't know that I have a whole lot else to add to what's already been said, other than, that by having so many people go through the leadership training and start to understand the concepts, it's just led to so much more, meaningful conversations and meaningful opportunities to become aware of things. When you sit in an executive seat, sometimes you become disconnected from the reality of what life is like out there. And that's probably par for the course, but to have some people be able to come up and say, hey, had you thought about this, or have you considered this opportunity, or hey, did you know this decision is going to impact us in the following way? Those types of conversations are so important and so valued, and kind of that whole know the stories that others tell about you. That's been very helpful for me, and I think us as an organization. And it's not always bells and whistles. It's not always good, but that's okay, because it's good information to help you move ahead with where we need to go.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a purpose element there that might make it easier, and that like you're not just listening to hear what people say. You're listening to improve the climate of the organization for others, to improve how you're able to serve others. Like the listening has a purpose that's not just about you and your organization. So yeah, thank you all for that, and thank you for the opportunity to tell this story, and for your engagement and all the time that you put into it. I don't know that people realize like how much effort goes into a journal story, but we're talking probably as many as like 8 or 9 hours of interviews with people across the organization, and then going through that and follow-up interviews to sort of check facts and check understanding, in addition to all the writing and the editing and stuff. So when you see this story, there's a lot that's gone into it to try to make it the best picture of situation that I can capture. And so wouldn't have been possible without all of your work and cooperation and willingness and energy to make this a priority with all the other things that you have to do. So I'm really grateful for that. I'm also grateful for like your candor, and everyone was just, I think it felt like very honest and authentic throughout this process. And one of the things that I was interested in, particularly from Greg, was so we talk about like, adaptive work being about change, but adaptive work is also about preservation. It's about keeping most of what you have, or the things that are most valuable to you, and changing some things so that you can move on to a better, different era or time. And I was really interested in your comments when we talked about the importance of preserving the culture of Fort County through this time of transformation. to you. And I'm curious, like when you look back now and knowing that you're not a finished product, but knowing that stuff has changed, how has the culture changed, and has the things changed that you hope would change, and have the things that you hoped would remain the same stayed that way?
Yeah, well, in behavioral health, our therapeutic tool, we don't have a scalpel or a dentist drill or a pick or anything like that. Our therapeutic tool is our relationships. And we want to always have those relationships be, first and foremost, whether that's with our patients or our community partners or our internal customers as well. I mean, we have to treat each other well as we treat the patients. And I think that when people experience change is stress. And when people get particularly stressed or overwhelmed, their focus changes. So part of our interest is to make sure that we don't lose sight of what we really need to be focused on, and that is to maintain relationships in a productive way with one another, so that it's a work environment we walk into and we still recognize and we enjoy being here, even though the work is different. We're gonna enjoy the culture of that company, and never lose sight of why we're here. When we walk through the door, the focus can't be on, oh, look at how this change has affected me and how I feel all day. And we want an outward focus that says, okay, how can I help you in your quest for achieving a goal or working with the patient population? So that's a value that we need to hang on to, and an attribute that we need to continue to maintain no matter what's going on around us. And I think that when you arm people with some tools, such as KLC does, to embrace the challenges that are out there and to look at how change can improve things, it doesn't become quite as stressful, because you're achieving something you know is valuable, that you want to see happen, and that just gives us some synergy. And so I think that our goal for years has been for Fort County to be a place that people want to work. Whether we're 200 employees or 400 employees, we want to be one of the best employers in the area. We want to be a good place to be. And so I think that no matter what challenge we have, we've got to maintain that kind of a focus. And our staff are seen to be engaged and encouraged, and quite frankly, persevering through a whole lot that I wish they didn't have to persevere through, but doing it well, because of what Steve described. We've got a common language. We've got open channels of communication. We're still learning how open those are, and how to be good listeners, and how to implement the feedback that we get in a balanced way, because everyone's interests have to be balanced. But I think that I would have to stamp the maintaining of important culture so far as a success. All of our change isn't done, but I just think we have a good framework to move forward, and people with that open communication understand the vision of why we're doing what we're doing. It's not just change for change's sake, but it's to better fulfill our mission, and for them to have a greater impact in the job they're doing. And some people may come to Fort County because they need a job. Most people come to Fort County because this is a mission for them in their life, and this is a passion they have. And if we can feed that passion, then we're going to achieve good things for the communities we serve. So that's a long answer to a short question. I don't know if I got to it all, but that's just kind of what's on my heart when I hear the question, and when I think about why we do what we do.
Yeah. And so do you think that that mindset is becoming clearer, or is it easier to communicate about, or what's changing about that mindset?
Well, I would be biased in my answer. Again, I'll kind of lean on Melissa here, because she interacts with so many different people across the organization, and they may speak a little more candidly to her than they do the executive director. But my bias is that, again, that they are embracing that people are having to test the waters and see what they trust about that. But that we're learning as we're going. As long as we're learning, we're gonna do okay. That's when we stop learning or turn off the source of information that we're going to have trouble. So, Melissa, maybe you can respond to that better than I did.
I agree. I do think that there are times that people are not going to express to Greg what they would express to me, and that's to be expected. But I do think that whenever they express it to me, for instance, they also know it's probably not going to just stop there, that I'm going to continue to try to take that up the chain somehow, with whatever anonymity is requested, kind of thing. So I think that even that is a step in the right direction. If they feel like they can elevate it to somebody, and like, for instance, I am not anybody's supervisor. I'm not the organizer, org chart upline to anybody. So for them to feel like they have a safe place to go express something, I call that a win also, even if we can't necessarily address their issue exactly how they hope to see it resolved or something, the communication of it is impressive and appreciated.
So earlier in the conversation, I referenced the triple whammy that Fork County faced. And I think as you read through the story, one aspect of that whammy gets a little more attention than the others, and that is the Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinic designation. And Fork County became one of the first of 6 in the state. And I wanted to turn to Steve and sort of get your perspective. So that whole process, part of that was legislation passed aimed at transforming our mental health system. And I'm curious, when you think about like the leadership training and that transformation going on at once, like how do those things connect? What role does leadership training play in that sort of situation? And how do you know what sort of impact it's having?
Yeah, when we received notice that we were going to be the first recipient of a expansion grant in Kansas that would allow us to be the first CCBHC lookalike certified community behavioral health clinic. Got to watch my acronyms here. But when we received that, we knew that we were going to have to go through rapid change over a very short amount of period. We received notice on a much quicker than we anticipated we would receive it. So we started the whole project like 3 months earlier. So we knew we were going to need to use and leverage as many tools as possible. And one of the things that just jumps out at me is we formed a change management subcommittee whose entire purpose was just bringing in lots of different voices and discussing what are all the changes, how do we communicate them, how can we communicate them effectively, and then eventually follow up with a feedback loop to make sure that our message is getting out there. And, when I was thinking about this question, one of the things that also jumped out at me is that we took a significant risk in pursuing this grant and taking some of the steps to prepare ourselves, not knowing if the legislation was going to pass, if we would have the ongoing financial support we needed. And for me, and part of our team's understanding is that we have to acknowledge the reality of the situation. Just a really quick story. I remember during the height of our state mental health state hospital crisis, when I was in a different role, I remember getting a call saying that a couple of our on-call providers were sick or not available, and we were really down to one person to cover a 5-county area. So really the emergency room had one staff member covering a 5-county area. And I just remember thinking, we have got to find a different and better way to manage things. And for me, CCBHC was the opportunity, and we needed to communicate that vision, that opportunity to our employees to say, hey, we're going to take the risk, but here's why, and here's what it can provide for us longer term if we do that. And eventually those conversations led to conversations with our other centers in the state, and then some national conversations about how can we make this happen as a statewide project. In KLC, and just understanding the importance of connecting with others, finding that collective purpose, and being willing to say, hey, this is a risk, but there is such tremendous opportunity here. And being, you don't know how this is going to end, But we believe if we do this and do it within our mission without compromising our culture, it could be a tremendous opportunity, not just for us, but for the entire state. And we've seen that play out. We still have a lot of work to do, don't get me wrong, but it's pretty cool to do the look back and see how that all transpired, and that it wasn't just people at the head of the table leading that. We needed our entire organization to buy in and jump on board, and they certainly did. And to me, that's exciting to be able to tell that story.
Yeah. It occurs to me that like sometimes leadership is about like seeing where things are going or should go and kind of getting there first. And in this case, you got there first, and the rest of the system followed, and that has kind of worked out for you. I'm curious, Steve, like for those of us who aren't in deep in mental health, I felt like you had a really great summary in the story about what this designation means for mental health care. Could you maybe just shed a little light of what's the most basic way to explain these changes to someone who's not in deep in mental health?
Well, I think simply speaking, it brings about a much more comprehensive model of care that's much more adequately funded than our previous model, and it provides some long-term stability. But it really creates some data-driven expectations and some quality measures that really focus to examine what's happening in all of our communities throughout Kansas, who lives there, what are their needs, how can we more effectively respond to their needs based on data and research and evidence-based models. But it provides an infrastructure, a funding infrastructure that allows us to sustain those changes over a longer period of time, versus having to just chase the next crisis after crisis, put out the next fire, so to speak. So it really is an opportunity to transform and stretch what's normal to us. We've never done across the board health checks, blood pressure checks, or BMI checks. We started doing that across the board on all of our individuals that come into our care, and that was a big shift. But that leads to conversations about smoking and tobacco and health issues that has allowed us to develop some programs and services around things we learned from collecting that data and thinking about the health of the whole person. Certainly mental health and addiction are a huge part of what we're going to be and who we're going to continue to be. But it's part of the larger equation at the individual and also at the community and state level. So it's a tremendous opportunity. There are currently, I believe, 9 certified community behavioral health clinics, with several more who will be coming on board in the next 6 months or so. So it truly is a story of systemic transformation that's still in the works.
Yeah, and kind of lying beneath that story of transformation, like that's also kind of where the conflict is too, because you've been doing things a very similar way, I think, as Greg says in the story, for a long time, and it represents a change that can be uncomfortable for both providers in terms of asking questions about things like blood pressure or examining cholesterol or whatever, to look at the total health of the person, as well as for patients who might not be used to coming in for therapy and having a broader look coming about. So that conflict is kind of like where the opportunities for leadership kind of come into the situation. And so Melissa, I'm curious, as kind of a person who has a really direct role with working and understanding the impacts of KLC and managing that relationship, when do you see the idea that anyone can lead anywhere, anytime showing up? And how do you see people embracing leadership as an activity?
Whenever I think about that, I have so many ideas that popcorn around that it's kind of hard to settle on just one, which I guess is a good problem to have. But to kind of tie into some of the things that have already been mentioned, the tobacco related stuff, we actually had some tobacco initiatives that we had started prior to ever getting this grant or becoming a certified clinic. But it was kind of moving at what I would call snail speed, because we were trying to gain input and investment. And then all of a sudden, when we got the grant, tobacco-free policies and that sort of thing are one of the things that the federal government wants to see from us. So we had some people that were championing this effort who had luckily been through multiple KLC programs at that point. They were some individuals that had a passion for that. To see them take that initiative with no senior authority originally as part of it. I mean, like we had Greg's check mark saying, yes, let's do that. But he let the individuals with the passion kind of lead the, steer the ship per se at first. And so, you saw that really take flight of them saying, okay, this is what we want. And this is the timeline we're going to get it done. To be honest, there was probably some awkwardness with some of it, because when you take people that are not in a position of authority, and then all of a sudden you're giving them at least informal authority to do some stuff, there was kind of like, well, who do I ask permission to buy something? Or who do I, like they're trying to figure out their way in it. But even that process was really engaging. And I loved watching that play out, I guess. There's other examples. There was an individual, and I'll try to be as vague as I can so that I don't call her out on a national platform, but she has, again, no position of authority in our agency, but shows leadership on a regular basis. She came back from Wiley going, I got some ideas and I got some things that I really want to work on, but I'm not a leader. And she just kept saying, but I'm not a leader. So we'll leave that in it for a different conversation. But what she did do is come back with the skills and the thought processes and the vocabulary ready to tackle some of those challenges that she saw from a different angle for the first time in many years of working here. And she just continued to elevate the conversation to different people, maybe rather than working at the direct upline that she'd always reported any kind of concerns only to her immediate supervisor, for instance. But all of a sudden she's having conversations with other people outside of that realm, not to usurp authority, but just to say, hey, do you realize that this is an issue and this is the issue? And she was definitely speaking from the heart. She took that principle and really nailed it because she was like, this is why it matters. And this is why it matters to this patient. And so, I'm sure that there was a dozen different things that came together to finally create some process changes, but I have zero doubt that her continuing to push that boulder around around the entire agency, touching different people with those conversations and saying, this isn't what's working best for our patients. We need to do better here. We need to do better at this. Definitely was a part of it. So I could probably come up with another dozen examples. You want more? Is that enough?
I think that's a really good representative example. But I also think it's interesting, like one of the things you help crystallize in the story is that like not everybody responds to these ideas or going to the training in the same way. Through the course of an interview with you and several other people, like we sort of identified these three different factions of people that, there are the people who it's sort of like, I think you say a religious revival for them to go through the training and bring these ideas into practice. There are others who just kind of go because you ask them to, and it's okay. And then there are people who either see it as a waste of time or didn't like it and just like sort of like, why did you send me here? And I think that's so interesting to put all those people back in the mix of your organization. And I think every organization that interacts with KLC is going to have those same factions. I brought that up to a person I was interviewing who works for a very large multinational corporation. And like, she just had this look of awareness on her face, like, oh yeah, we have the same factions here. So I'm curious, like what that looks like to interact and have all those factions come back into the mix, and how do you work to help keep those conversations going and keep bringing those ideas back into the mix, knowing that people have different levels of investment and interest and engagement in them.
I think from my perspective, I think that when we encourage them to just go into it with an open mind from the beginning, a lot of those that were kind of lukewarm come back with more than they expected going into it. And that's encouraging. The individual that I was just referencing in my last story, she actually went because she was like, my boss kind of wants me to, I mean, that was, she wasn't really fired up to go. But when she came back, she was really glad she had. And then now she's proceeded to do some additional training. So, just because they might be in that, middle ground originally doesn't mean they necessarily stay there. And some of the ones that come back, they might not be super fired up at the beginning, but as they see it in action, I think it has motivated some people and given them confidence to embrace it with time. Maybe, that we've seen that bell curve of the early adopters. So there's a lot of people that are not that early adopter, but they kind of come along and at least they have the vocabulary to where they know what is being discussed and see that in action around them. So.
Well, and I think that there's an awareness that gets developed that even if you don't want to conceptualize yourself as a leader, you are, because we all influence one another one way or another. And now here's a framework where we can do it a little more intentionally as opposed to randomly. And even if you don't want, again, that label, or you're afraid that, gosh, if I identify myself as a leader, there's going to be more responsibility, and I don't want that either. It's really about that issue of influence and what do you contribute to the culture up and down the hallway and to the quality of work environment that your colleague has. And any feedback that you've got is relevant. You don't have to take responsibility for making the change happen, but at least provide the information. And when they can embrace that as, okay, I'm a person of influence, as opposed to I've got, this leadership responsibility that I am now going to have something added to my job description. I think they feel a little more empowered just to have those conversations.
Yeah. So something I was curious about going into this story, like looking at organizations where you're encouraging more people to lead, if it'd sort of be like everybody trying to do too much leadership and not like respecting authority. But it doesn't sound like your experience has been that you've had more than leadership than you wanted to deal with. Like it still seems like there are so many opportunities for leadership that like the need for it feels kind of endless. Does that feel right?
I think so. I think it's definitely, we don't think we've seen a surge of individuals trying to grab more power or anything like that. I haven't seen any of that. One of the things that we do is when we do our annual evaluations, we assess, what leadership activities have you been involved in? And typically you see things like, well, I serve in this community group, or I'm in this subcommittee, or I help lead this group, or I'm involved in this activity. And one that really stood out at me is one of the employees I supervise, and she said, I help with this group. I do the typical kind of leadership activities, but she said, I'm also the person, if there's someone who's gone through a loss or had a rough time, I'm the one, I'll make a handmade card and get everyone's signature and make sure that person gets that card and just knows that people are thinking about them. And I was just thinking about that. That is such an important leadership activity. And the reason I bring it up is that people, once they understand this, they start to really connect with what does leadership look like for me. It's not just, what do people in authority do, is what does this actually mean to me? And I think that is really important to consider and remember as you talk about leadership as an activity, not a position.
It adds to purpose, and that adds to satisfaction for people.
I'm also interested, so I think it's come up a couple times that even in doing this story, you wanted to recognize that it's not finished yet. It's not a finished story. It's not a finished product. You're not where you want to be. And I'm curious if each of you could speak to what are the challenges that still remain? Like, what would you address that would make you feel more of a finished product?
I know something that I had conversations with Greg too many times to list. I'll get personally frustrated with not seeing more rapid progress, for instance, like why isn't this being talked about in this format in every meeting from the time they come back or something, whatever it is. And he has really talked me off the ledge several times of realizing how big of an organization and how long it takes to really create systemic transformational kind of change at all. So I know that a barrier is that, and I'm not alone on that mindset, I guess. So I've seen other people that have come back very excited about the principles, and then if they tried experimenting and didn't get the immediate response that they were hoping for, then all of a sudden they got a little discouraged too. And so I think that's a barrier for us, especially since we are so big and have been stretched out over so many years. If we had thrown everybody into a pool, got them all trained at once, and then they all came back, it would look a lot different. But we have people that it literally took the first training over 5 years ago, and maintaining that momentum and that excitement and that willingness to experiment has had its challenges just based on the sheer timeline of it.
Yeah, I'll throw something out pretty practical is we're still not where we need to be from a workforce perspective, and that's not unique to us. It's a national issue, but I think it's something that we can use our leadership training to apply, but that's an area where we've got to see some growth and expansion to cover some key positions. Some of them have been available for years now, so a workforce shortage and adapting to this kind of new culture of what does work mean and where do I work from, when there's still work to be done here in the community and the ground, at the ground level, that can't always be done from your home, so trying to put all that together and make sense out of it in this, this next phase of our growth. But workforce is important, and KLC will be an important part of getting our heads around that. I don't have the answers yet. That's one of the areas.
Yeah, and I would concur. Workforce is an issue. Turnover is an issue, because every time we have turnover, we lose some institutional knowledge about KLC principles and how they incorporated that in their workday. So we're going to train the next person, assuming we can find that person and get them hired and get them trained. So we're having to kind of play catch up ball there. But also with workforce shortages comes workload excess. And when you have an excess of work to be done, it becomes a little more difficult to have that intentional time to focus and say, okay, here's how I'm going to exert some leadership and to do some experiments, because I'm just putting fires out. And so that workload can be a real challenge. But I do think that we have buy-in and we have a good start, and those challenges are just things we have to keep chipping away at. They say, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time. So we're just going to take one piece at a time. We're going to keep working on it, and we know over time that it'll gain the momentum that we want. But it is an absolute challenge, the workforce.
Yeah, and it seems, and those feel like challenges you can't avoid, because they feel very like they're unique to you, but they're also systemic, that they are like, I could probably call any person, any organization working in your field and probably find similar challenges related to those issues, which on one hand, you're not alone. And on the other hand, when something's systemic, that just requires the whole new levels of leadership investment to sort of figure out how to manage those things. So your journey with KLC began with this a program called the Leadership Transformation Grant, which covers the tuition to attend KLC programs. I'm curious, several years into that, and sort of being a story about a place where everyone is trying to lead. We might have some of those folks, watching today. What advice would you give to organizations looking to spread leadership throughout their organization and become a place where everyone leads?
I would start purposefully integrating some of the content into the work you do, whether it's simple aspirations, exercise, aspirations, challenge, exercise. Start using terms like technical and adaptive challenges. Identifying those adaptive challenges and calling them that, naming them that, is a really good start, because it helps. It helps people start thinking, more adaptively and more from the KLC lens. But anywhere you can find the opportunity to embed those activities, it doesn't always have to be formal. It doesn't have to be a formal exercise. It can just be in conversations, or it can be in supervision. If you have a supervision protocol or set of supervision tools, if you can find a way to bring leadership into that supervision, whether it's leadership challenges or leadership growth, and use those KLC principles, that's a really nice tool. But just getting started and start using the language at as many levels as you can, in as many different ways as you can.
I would just affirm, not that KLC needed this from me, but I would affirm the mindset that you have to have senior buy-in. We did, thank goodness, but if you do not have your senior authority agreeing with this, then you definitely will run into a lot more speed bumps. And I think that KLC requiring that is core to success for anybody looking at going into the grant or in this journey period.
Yeah, and I would echo what Melissa has said. Steve's right that it needs to kind of through osmosis to work its way through, all levels of the organization, and that can be done subtly without beating people over the head with it. But Melissa's right. The leadership staff, the organization chart, that leadership really needs to understand the concepts and buy into it. Because if you have a middle manager or a coordinator that doesn't either understand or isn't willing to embrace the philosophy that we have, you want to know that because they're going to be working, kind of in a counterproductive way if they're oppressing people that are trying to learn these concepts and exercise them. You don't need that barrier. So I would say start with your management team, if you will, and have some honest conversations about what that looks like for each of the people on that team and how they feel about it, and then let it move from there. But if you don't have the buy-in from the beginning, it'll get sabotaged.
Well, thank you all for that. And I am leaving curious, I wonder if someone getting into this will I wonder if they'll be looking for a moment when they know this is really going the direction they want, or it's really working. And I wanted to give each of you a chance. Is there a moment you've experienced that felt like a tipping point, or felt oh yeah, this is taking us where we want to go? And if you don't have one, that's fine. But I'm curious if you have one. I'd love to hear it.
I think for me was watching, he mentioned the change management team earlier. That was one of many, many teams. And when we tackled the grant, this is one of my colleagues used the term, and I'd never heard it before. It's probably said 100 times, but flying the plane while you're building it kind of philosophy. And that is definitely what we were doing in that grant process. We were a unicorn at the time. And so figuring it out, we adore Greg and Steve, but there's no way on this planet they could have done it alone. And so us building that team structure and encouraging people of every rung of the ladder to be a part of the big picture in our success. I just think that was the moment for me that I thought, this is it in action. We're not perfect at it. We have plenty of growth to have, but this is it in action.
Yeah, I would, same idea. I don't know that there was any one moment, but I can still look back. Really, when we were talking about this story, the look back was wow, we have really, made it through some really challenging situations and come out on this. And being able to look back and reflect is really important. I don't know that there is any one moment, but I would say this, that I remember the very first CEO that I ever worked under, he told me that, when I leave this place, if the whole thing falls apart because I'm not here anymore, I failed. I haven't done my job. And that was really impactful to me back in the day. I think that regardless of who's sitting in, certain seats of authority, that the culture and strength of the organization will push through. And I believe in that, because what we do is essential to the wellness of our communities, and people believe in it. And just that ability to self-sustain and continue to persevere regardless of what's happening around us, to me, is a reflection that KLC has been a part of helping us grow stronger. But I don't know if there's any one moment that just jumps out at me. I think it's collective for sure.
Yeah, I don't have an aha moment either, but what I would tell anybody that's giving consideration to this is just start.
Yeah.
Start somewhere. It doesn't matter where. That can be your first experiment, is just to get out and expose yourself to the principles, expose your team, have the conversation, and it'll take care of itself. It's I think very useful model and format, and it's the way things should be. So it'll come natural once you get rolling with it. So just start somewhere. It doesn't matter where. Just get started.
Well, that seems like a great place to end. We've come to a time boundary. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your stories. And the good news is, you'll get a little break from talking to me after talking to me a lot over the last 3 months. So it's been really great to get to know you. And thanks for being on call for one more opportunity to share your story. And if you want to read that story, it's currently live at klcjournal.com. The print edition with that story will be heading to mailboxes within the next week. And we're planning at the Journal to go on the road for a series of events in May and June. More details on that will be to come. So we've done a lot of Journal Lives in the past, and we still love this format, but we kind of felt this itch to go out and go places. And so if you have an idea about how we can bring a conversation in your community to fruition, or we can help mobilize that a little bit, we'd love to have you reach out to us and talk about those sorts of things, because we really are interested in the community impact and the community contact that the Journal can have. With that, in addition to thanking our guest, I want to not forget to thank our media sponsor, KMUW, Wichita Public Radio, 89.1 FM, who's been helping us get the word out about this event. Thank you for the audience to join us and hear these stories and talk about what it looks like to build a workplace where everyone leads. And I'll leave you with hope that you will remember that how well we talk about tough issues matters, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next conversation. And we're clear.
Great work. Thank you all.